is Megan, and this week I have a super fun play for us to unpack. Hannah Cowley's romantic comedy from 1780, The Belle's Stratagem. It's a story full of hilarious wit, a large cast of fun characters, and a touch of romantic-era feminism. Fun fact, this play was so beloved by Queen Victoria that it was dedicated to her, and Her Majesty requested that The Belle's Stratagem be performed annually in court for multiple years. Stick around to hear more. Let's set the scene. Imagine a time before electric lights, television, modern medicine, and general cleanliness, and even cars. It's England in the late 1700s, and London is a bustling hub of life and culture. Think cobblestone or dirt roads, horse-drawn carriages, etc., etc. Those who are wealthy enough will enjoy gallivanting in the streets, hurrying from one art auction to another, and finishing the day at a private dinner with friends at their estates. The weather is comfortable, sitting between 55 and 65 degrees with little to no rain. Music is often heard in the streets, either from street performers or from a nearby playhouse or theater. Overall, it's a great time to be a white person with money or status, although that's the case for most of history. Speaking of people with money and status, who are all having a great time, let's dive into The Belle's Stratagem. To start off, let's do a quick character breakdown. It sounds like a lot to remember, but don't worry, I won't quiz you or anything. Our main character is Miss Letitia Hardy, the beautiful and headstrong daughter of a man who simply goes by Hardy. As his name implies, he is a physically robust man. That's a common theme in this play. Most of the characters' names are a pun about their physical appearance or personality. Moving on, we have Doracourt, a sought-after young gentleman who, although he's a bit shallow, Doracourt and Letitia have been arranged to be married since a young age, although they haven't seen each other in quite some time. We also have a small cast of gentlemen who are acquaintances with our main characters. Saville is the kind-hearted close friend of Doracourt. There's Crokill, who writes a gossip column about all of the socialites in London. Next is Courtall, who, as his name suggests, tries to court all. He's quite the womanizer and kind of a gross, creepy dude. More on that later. Dick is one of Courtall's servants. Villers is another socialite. There's also Flutter, the town gossip who loves to over-embellish his stories. Moving on to our ladies, there is the boisterous Mrs. Racket, a friend of the Hardys and another socialite. Her bestie is Miss Ogle. Both are single or widowed and just have a grand old time running around town and gossiping. There's Kitty Willis, whose name already kind of sounds sexy, I don't know. She's a loose woman who's hired in a plot that we'll get into later on. Lastly, we have the couple involved in our story's side plot, the Touchwoods. Sir George Touchwood is a controlling and jealous man. He's been newly married to Lady Frances Touchwood, a quiet and sheltered girl from the country who longs for the exciting life of the city. All right, I know that was a lot, but I promise we'll get through it together, and I'll remind you who's who along the way. To start our story, we see Saville and Courtall chatting in the lobby of an inn. Saville is awaiting the arrival of his dear friend Doracourt, and his servant comes to tell him that he's arrived. Over at Doracourt's house, we see Crokill trying to bribe Doracourt's porter into giving him some hot gossip for the column about his boss. Unfortunately, the porter informs Crokill that Doracourt isn't surrounded by very much drama. Finally, Saville arrives and the two bros catch up after some time apart. Doracourt informs Saville that he's finally met up with his betrothed, none other than Letitia Hardy. He was unimpressed with her during their meeting, saying she was sheepish and too bland for his taste. Kind of rude. We move on to Hardy's house, where Villers, Flutter, and Mrs. Racket speak to Letitia about her meeting with Doracourt. Letitia is frustrated with Doracourt's indifference towards her. Her father arrives and chastises her for these frustrations. He promises that Doracourt indeed loves her, but Letitia begs to differ. It's during this scene that Letitia comes up with a plan to make this man fall madly in love with her. First, she'll convince him to hate her, and from there will transform that hate into passionate love. At the top of the second act, Mrs. Racket and Miss Ogle confront Sir George Touchwood about his controlling nature toward his wife, Frances. Lady Frances remains quiet until Flutter reveals that Sir George released her favorite bullfinch out of jealousy for her love for the bird. Lady Frances becomes upset, and for the first time leaves her husband's side to go about town with Mrs. Racket and Miss Ogle. The three women visit an auction house owned by an auctioneer named Silvertongue. While there, Courtall spies Lady Frances and begins to lust after her. Gross. In Act 3, Letitia's ploy for Doracourt's hatred has begun. When he arrives for dinner, she makes brash comments and presents herself as a lewd and unintelligent woman. Doracourt is so horrified that he intends to leave London immediately, but Mrs. Racket convinces him to stay the night and attend a large masquerade ball. Cordall tells Savile that he plans to seduce Lady Frances at the masquerade ball by posing as her husband. Cordall sends his servant Dick to discover what type of costume Sir George will be wearing. This obviously enrages Savile because he's actually a good person, and Savile pays Dick to bring this information back to him. Dick agrees, and Savile plans to counter Cordall's greasy plot. Back at the Touchwoods, George laments that he and Frances have grown apart. She returns from her adventure into the city and decides that she has missed George so much and will never leave his side again. They both decide to go to the masquerade together. In Act 4, the masquerade spearheads everyone's plans. Letitia arrives in a costume that conceals her identity, and she intends to seduce Doracourt without blowing her cover. She succeeds, making him believe that she is the most mystical and charming creature on earth. Girl boss. She never shares her name and convinces him that he will know her identity when the time is right. Later, Savile arrives at the ball with a woman named Kitty Willis. Savile is dressed as Sir George Touchwood and Kitty Willis as Lady Frances Touchwood. When the real Touchwoods arrive, Savile whisks Frances away and warns her of Cordall's plot to seduce her. When Savile leaves, Willis is sitting alone, dressed as Frances. Cordall swoops in and pretends to be Sir George. He's also dressed as Sir George. There's 3 guys wearing the same costume here. He swoops in and pretends to be Sir George. He tells Willis that they must leave, and the two depart. Unbeknownst to Cordall, he is leaving with Kitty Willis instead of Lady Frances. Cordall takes Willis back to his apartment. Savile, Flutter, and the other men barge into Cordall's apartment before Cordall can unmask Willis. Cordall claims that he has the delightful Lady Frances in his bedchamber. As he announces this, Willis comes prancing out, revealing herself to everyone. Cordall is humiliated. Everyone laughs, and Cordall states that he must immediately leave London for Paris. With this, we begin our final act. Doracourt is distressed that he's met the woman of his dreams, but doesn't know her name. Plus, he's still engaged to Letitia. He decides to fake insanity to get out of his engagement. Savile tells the Hardys of this plan, and Mrs. Racket demands that Doracourt come to the Hardys' residence at once, insanity and all. He arrives, and Mrs. Racket immediately calls his bluff. Doracourt reveals that he's depressed that he must marry Letitia when he is so in love with the mystery woman. At this point, Letitia reveals herself as the mystery woman and declares that she can be any type of wife he desires. Doracourt is so overcome with love that he asks her only to be herself, and the two happily get married. Whew! There we go. I know, it was a wild ride, but we got through it. Let's take a quick break, and we'll come back to break this all down and talk about why this play is so awesome. Welcome back. Now that we've gone through Letitia's wild ride of deceit and seduction, we can break it down and understand just why the Belle Stratagem was, and still is, an important piece of theater history. First, let's talk about the societal standards of women at this time that the play was released. It's no surprise that women had a hard time breaking into the playwriting scene. Hannah Cowley was one of the first female playwrights to see so much success at the time. Women were looked down on by society in general, no surprise, with traditional gender norms like homemaking and childbearing that canceled out the possibility of a rich professional life. In an article for the Wake Tech Literary Magazine and Club, writer Tiffany Wolfe states that women were increasingly prolific writers, writing about their own thoughts and experiences on the topic. Using language that was easy to understand, these women used their experiences to, in many cases, advocate for more egalitarian treatment from both men as individuals as well as society at large. So as Hannah Cowley is writing this piece, not only is she creating art to entertain audiences, as any playwright is, she's fighting for her own rights as an artist and woman within her society. However, the Belle Stratagem was actually pretty well received upon its premiere in England. I was able to find a news article that reviewed the play, and the public's only complaints were that there were some frivolous scenes throughout the script that added little to the main plot, but that's a pretty common thing. Otherwise, the comedy was successful, and audiences loved the characters. So much so that the Queen of England herself requested that the Belle Stratagem be performed at court for many years. I don't know about you, but if the Queen wanted my play performed annually for her own entertainment, I'd count it as a win. It's also important to look at the character of Letitia Hardy and her presence within the script. Letitia is a headstrong woman who, at the time of the play's release, may not be a fan favorite among men who weren't used to seeing such a strong female character. It was common for powerful women to be looked down on or demonized in theater at the time. Even in film and theater today, we still see women that go off the deep end and murder their husbands and families, practicing witchcraft, etc. But Letitia was never shown in a light that made her out to be the villain of our story. She had individual thoughts and feelings and devised a plan to win her husband's love without hurting anyone. This is why she was such an interesting character at the time. Although she was a strong woman, she was never seen as a threat to the men in our story or the men in the audience, while still providing a relatable character for female viewers to connect with. Overall, the Belle Stratagem is a striking and lighthearted play that connects with audiences just as deeply as it did when it was released. The strong will of a woman who refuses to marry a man that isn't deeply in love with her, a cast of characters that aid her in finding that love, and some funny jokes along the way. Throw in a dash of light early-era feminism, and it's the perfect recipe for a great night at the theater. Once again, my name is Megan McDonald. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed.